Welcome back to Fear Files Whispered. Before we begin, a warning. The stories you're about to hear are real, documented cases from the Bermuda Triangle. 3 disappearances, still unsolved, still unexplained. If you think you know this place, think again. Let's begin. I never planned on returning to Yokosuka. Not after what happened to my father. Not after the ocean gave back nothing but silence. But grief does strange things to a man. And this time it dragged me halfway across the world to stand on the same docks where the Kayo Maru No. 5 last refueled in 1953. My father, Daniel Mercer, had been obsessed with that ship for as long as I could remember. He'd been a maritime historian at the University of Washington, the kind of guy who spent summer vacations tracing the routes of doomed vessels instead of taking us camping like normal dads. He used to tell me that understanding the ocean's mysteries meant understanding something deeper, something older than our species knows how to name. When I was a kid, I thought he was romanticizing danger. When I grew older, I realized he was terrified of it. But he never stopped searching. And then 3 years ago, he vanished while doing private research near the Devil's Sea, also called the Dragon's Triangle, a stretch of water off the coast of Japan, notorious for unexplained disappearances, magnetic anomalies, and centuries-old legends of sea dragons pulling ships into the deep. His rental boat washed ashore with the GPS fried, and his notebook was found soaked but intact. Inside was a single line written on the last page, "It's still here." My mother warned me not to go digging through the past, but the past had already swallowed my father whole. So here I was, in Yokosuka, chasing the ghost of a man who chased ghosts for a living. I rented a small room overlooking the harbor, a place where the air tasted like rust and salt, and the nights seemed unnaturally quiet. From my window, I could see the black Pacific stretching out until it merged with the sky. Locals didn't talk about the Devil's Sea unless you bought them enough drinks, and even then their voices dropped low, as if the water itself might be listening. The older fishermen told me the same story, the Kayo Maru No. 5, a Japanese research vessel, vanished on the 24th of September 1953, along with its crew of 31, while investigating seismic activity and strange sightings in the region. The Japanese government officially blamed an underwater volcano, but none of the men I spoke to believed that. They said no bodies, no debris, no oil slick, nothing had ever been found. "Ships sink," one old fisherman told me outside a ramen shop near Verney Park, "but they do not disappear." I thought he was just being dramatic until things started happening that I couldn't explain. The first night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., I woke to a faint tapping on my window. I was 10 stories up. The wind was dead still. The tapping continued slow, deliberate like someone knocking with a single knuckle. When I yanked the curtains open, the window was empty, the balcony dry, the hallway silent when I checked it. I tried to write it off as jet lag until I found wet footprints leading from my door to the elevator. Human footprints, bare, too large to be mine. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I contacted the Maritime Self-Defense Force Museum near the port, hoping to get access to some archived material on the Kayo Maru No. 5. A clerk led me to a dim, cold basement room filled with metal filing cabinets older than I was. I spent hours flipping through logbooks, radio transcripts, and brittle yellowed papers until I found it an audio transcript labeled End of Transmission KM5. The final recorded communication from the ship before it vanished. The log said the message was almost unintelligible due to interference, but a few words had been painstakingly transcribed. They were my father's last written words. Exactly. "It's still here. A chill slid down my spine as I read it. I felt like someone was standing behind me, watching me read, breathing softly against my neck. When I turned, no one was there, but a file drawer I'd closed minutes earlier now hung open a few inches. That night, the tapping returned. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. When I went to the window this time, something in the darkness moved slowly, as if drifting beneath the surface of the night itself. A shape, enormous, impossible to define, sank into the shadows before I could truly see it. I realized then that sleep was no longer an option until I confronted whatever had taken my father. I rented a small fishing boat from a reluctant old man in Kurihama. He told me people who go looking for the Dragon's Triangle's secrets often find them just before they die. I didn't tell him I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of never knowing. The journey out was calm at first, too calm. The water became unnaturally still, flat like a sheet of black glass. The horizon faded into a murky gray haze. My compass began to twitch, then spin slowly, like a toy winding down. The GPS went dead. My radio began picking up faint whispers, static warped into fragmented syllables that sounded almost human. Then the fog rolled in, thick, damp, swallowing the world. I should have been terrified, but all I could think about was my father. Somewhere out here, he had heard the same whispers. He had watched the same fog creep over the water. Maybe he had seen what I was about to. When the first sound came, it wasn't from the radio, it was under the boat. A scraping. Slow, metallic, like something with claws dragging along the hull. The boat shuddered. I froze. The scraping grew louder, circling beneath me. Then something slammed into the underside hard enough to nearly knock me overboard. I grabbed the railing, heart pounding, but the ocean's surface remained untouched, smooth as tar. Another impact shook the boat. And then the radio exploded with noise, cries, static, something banging, someone shouting in Japanese, and underneath it all, a deep, guttural moan that didn't sound remotely human. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio, but before I could touch it, the fog ahead of me began to glow. A dim, pulsing red light spread through the haze. It looked like the sun bleeding underwater. Then something massive moved through it. Slowly, an outline took shape, a silhouette of a ship, rusted, broken, half-eaten by the sea, yet unmistakably real. The Kaio Maru No. 5. Or what was left of it. My lungs froze. The ship drifted toward me, silent, ghost-like, the red glow illuminating jagged holes in its hull. Through one shattered porthole, I thought I saw someone standing inside. A figure, unmoving, watching me. My father. I whispered his name. The moment the sound left my lips, the ocean erupted. A colossal force pulled at the boat, dragging it toward the decaying vessel. The scraping beneath me turned into violent thrashing. The red light pulsed faster, brighter, and the whispers on the radio became screams, human, desperate, overlapping each other, until they merged into one chilling plea. Help us. The abandoned ship loomed so close, I could see the rust flakes peeling from its rails. Something reached out from a broken window, an arm, pale and water-swollen, fingers too long, joints bent wrong. It clawed at the air, reaching for me, for the living, for anything. The ocean beneath me boiled. The boat lurched toward the open hull of the Kaio Maru No. 5 as if being swallowed. I knew then that this wasn't a ghost ship. It was a grave that wasn't finished collecting the dead. I cut the engine, grabbed the emergency flare, and fired it into the darkness. The explosion of light tore through the fog, revealing something beneath the water, an enormous shadow coiled under both vessels, moving with purpose, a shape no science book had ever named. The red glow flickered violently. The arm retreated. The screams warped into static. And then, silence. The ocean released my boat. The fog dissolved. The Cayo Maru number 5 was gone. Completely gone. When I looked down into the water, the shadow beneath me slipped away into the depths like a serpent returning to its lair. I returned to Yokosuka, shaking so hard the harbor master thought I was hypothermic. I said nothing to him, nothing to anyone. I packed my things and boarded the first flight back to Seattle. But I didn't leave everything behind. In my cabin, on the plane tray table, was a single sheet of soaked, yellowed paper, my father's handwriting smeared across it. It said, "It's still here," and underneath, in handwriting that wasn't his, and now it knows your name. I never told anyone why I really moved to Atsugi, Japan, and I sure as hell didn't tell my mother, who still thinks I came here to teach English and experience the world, as she put it. The truth was uglier, heavier, and it pressed on me every night, the way the humid air presses against the base housing windows at Atsugi Naval Air Facility. My older brother Aaron, a Navy intel officer and lifelong aviation freak, disappeared during a flight training exercise 2 years ago. Not in the Persian Gulf, not over the South China Sea, but in a place most Americans don't even know exists, the Devil's Sea. Japan's version of the Bermuda Triangle. The official report said equipment malfunction, but the plane's transponder didn't fail. It simply blinked out of existence on radar. Just like the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force patrol that vanished in 1953, the one the old records say flew into a bright white haze before disappearing forever. My brother grew up reading about that case, even talked about retracing their flight path as a joke once. Now he was gone, his jet never recovered, and I was left with the single voicemail he left me a week before his final flight. If anything happens, don't come looking. But people like me don't listen to warnings from the dead. That's why I found myself walking through the narrow streets of Ayase, the small city just outside the base, as the late summer sun bled into the horizon and neon signs flickered alive. I'd spent 3 months interviewing retired Japanese pilots, fishermen, and even a few conspiracy-obsessed American expats who claimed the Devil's Sea was a thin place in the world. Most gave me rumors. A few gave me details, but only one gave me something I'd call a hook, the kind that sinks into your brain and refuses to let go. An old mechanic named Kenta, who'd worked at Atsugi in the 72nd, told me he once serviced a patrol plane that returned from the Devil's Sea with its entire underside covered in scorch marks, like it had flown through a furnace. The pilots refused to speak about what they saw, but he remembered one phrase an officer muttered while being helped down the ladder. It wasn't cloud. He insisted it was real. He insisted the same thing that took the 1,953 patrol was still out there. And he insisted there were radio recordings, classified, archived, somewhere on base, and off-limits to civilians. That was all I needed to hear. At 2:07 a.m., the next night, a hooked part of the story hit me out of nowhere. My brother's final radar ping had been at that exact minute. I couldn't ignore the timing. I couldn't ignore the insomnia that held me in its fist. So I drove to the edge of the base, parked near the old hangars no one used anymore, and slipped inside the Aviation History Annex, a dusty storage building that smelled like hydraulic fluid and forgotten ghosts. The place was quiet, except for the occasional creak of metal expanding in the heat. I found a stack of declassified documents, maps of the Pacific, and then something odd, a reel-to-reel tape labeled Air Patrol Transmission 1953, Dragon's Triangle. My heart hammered. The hook was buried deep now. I threaded the tape into an ancient player sitting on a desk cluttered with outdated avionics parts. The recording crackled to life with static and faint Japanese voices. At first, it was routine chatter, coordinates, weather readings. Then the tone changed. One pilot's voice tightened, urgency bleeding into every syllable. I don't speak much Japanese, but I recognized the words for cloud, bright, and can't see horizon. Then came breathing rapid, panicked. Another voice shouted something that sounded like, "Turn back." The static intensified. A loud metallic screech tore through the audio. And then, something else. Not a voice. Not human. A deep, resonant hum, like a whale singing through broken speakers, but layered with something mechanical, almost electrical. The same hum I'd heard in my brother's final voicemail buried under his words, like interference. The tape cut out abruptly. My skin went cold. A sharp knocking noise exploded behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. No one was there. But a toolbox that had been on a workbench was now on the floor, wrenches scattered across the concrete. I bolted out of the annex, heart racing. But outside felt wrong. The air was unnaturally still. The night was too quiet. And above the far runway, a pale white glow formed faint at first, then pulsing. The same kind of glow described in every Devil's Sea disappearance report I had read, including my brother's. The hook yanked again, hard. The next morning I told myself I'd imagined it, that grief was bending reality. But that afternoon, while cleaning my brother's old storage box, I found something that made my blood run cold. A flight map with a route traced in red marker circling the Dragon's Triangle. And next to it, in Aaron's handwriting, it sees us. He never showed that note to anyone. He didn't want them thinking he'd lost it. He didn't want them grounding him. Everything in me screamed to stop, to go home, to leave whatever took my brother alone. But grief and obsession are siblings, and both of them whispered the same thing. You're already too close to turn around. Which is how I found myself boarding a civilian-operated observation plane out of Choshiport the following week. The pilot, a leathery old man who introduced himself only as Mori, warned me twice that weather was unpredictable in the Triangle. When I told him I wasn't there to sightsee, he just nodded, like he already knew that. The flight began smooth, peaceful even. Below us stretched endless blue water, glittering under the sunlight. Maury pointed out fishing routes, old ship lanes, areas where the ocean floor dropped off into trenches deeper than the Grand Canyon. But about an hour in, the plane lurched so subtly at first, I barely noticed. The instruments on Maury's dash flickered. The compass needle jittered, then spun in a slow, lazy circle. Maury muttered something under his breath. The air pressure shifted. My ears popped. Then the horizon vanished. A wall of pearl-white fog rose ahead of us, swallowing sky and sea alike. My stomach twisted. The plane entered the fog before I could protest. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath came out in pale clouds. A faint vibration crept through the floor, like we were flying over poorly tuned engines. Then the humming started. The same hum from the 1953 tape. The same hum under my brother's final voicemail. It seeped through the cabin walls, vibrating in my bones. Maury slammed buttons, trying to re-establish the gyro. The altimeter spun wildly. The radio erupted with static. Static that formed shapes, patterns, voices. English, Japanese, some language I couldn't place. Turn back, no horizon, white, everything is white. Help, and then my brother's voice, clear as day. "Eli, don't look at it." I froze. Maury grabbed my shoulder, knuckles white, and pointed through the windshield. Something moved in the fog, huge, slow. Passing just ahead of us, its outline rippling the mist like a creature swimming beneath a frozen lake. Not a plane, not a whale, not anything I've ever seen. The fog ahead brightened, glowing, pulsing like a heartbeat. And within that brightness, silhouettes appeared, shapes of aircraft, dozens of them, suspended as if hanging underwater. Some were Japanese patrol planes from the 52nds. Some looked like modern fighters, all frozen in place, drifting in the glowing whiteness, like insects trapped in amber. "Impossible," Maury whispered. But the worst part wasn't the planes. It was the faces in their windows, pale, motionless, watching us. Human figures curled in their seats, as if caught in the exact second of their final breaths. My brother was one of them. I saw him in the cockpit of his jet, eyes open, staring through the fog directly at me. My stomach dropped. My vision swam. Something massive shifted beneath us, rocking the plane. The hum deepened. The fog began to swirl, pulling us toward the glowing heart of the storm. The plane shuddered. The metal groaned. I felt something reaching, pulling like gravity made of hands. Maury screamed at me to cut weight. I yanked open the emergency hatch and threw out every piece of gear I could reach. My brother's face drifted closer, becoming clearer, the same face from our childhood photos, the same eyes that warned me in that voicemail. And then he moved, his mouth opened, not speaking, screaming. The fog ignited in brilliant white, and the hum became a roar, something ancient, mechanical, alive. The plane jerked violently, as if released. Maury slammed the throttle. The engine shrieked. We shot backward, away from the glow, back into the swirling fog. The silhouettes vanished. The humming diminished. And then sunlight, blue sky, calm ocean. The instruments stabilized. The radio fell silent. The fog was gone, like it had never existed. Maury didn't speak the entire flight back. I didn't either. When we landed, he simply looked at me and said, "Do not return." That night, in my barracks room, I collapsed onto the bed and finally let myself cry. For Aaron. For the pilots lost in 1953. For the ones I saw suspended like ghosts in the light. For the truth I could never explain. Around 2:07 a.m., my brother's time, I heard something. A faint hum. Then a voicemail notification. Unknown number. I hit play with trembling hands. My brother's voice, whispering, "It's not gone, Eli." A pause. A shaky breath. "It followed you back." I never intended to set foot in Kesennuma again. Not after what happened to my uncle. Not after the ocean swallowed him and spat back only a broken radio and a piece of netting so frayed it looked melted rather than torn. But grief has a way of dragging you back to the places you fear most. And that's exactly what it did to me 3 months ago, when I stepped off the bus onto a harbor road that still smelled like diesel, fish scales, and old storms. My uncle, Hajime, vanished with 4 other fishermen somewhere near the Devil's Sea, Japan's notorious Dragon's Triangle, in 2003. In almost the exact same region where multiple Japanese fishing vessels disappeared mysteriously in the 1,950 seconds. Most of them never found. Some sending strange partial distress calls that emergency operators later described as sounding like several voices overlapping, none making sense. I grew up hearing those stories whispered at family gatherings, always spoken in the same hushed, cautious tone people use for curses. My uncle had laughed them off when he was alive, saying fishermen didn't fear legends, just bad weather and bad luck. But the night before he disappeared, He called my mother and said something that I never forgot because she cried for hours after hanging up. He said, "If you hear the radio, answer for me. Don't listen." I was 12 then. I didn't understand. But now I'm 27, and I came back to Kesanuma for one reason. I needed to know whether my uncle died a normal death at sea, or whether something in that triangle of cursed water reached out and claimed him in a way the living were never meant to understand. My first night back, I checked into a small guest house near the harbor, the kind with paper-thin walls and tatami floors that creaked with every step. I couldn't sleep. Around 2:40 a.m., I heard something strange, 3 faint taps on my window, evenly spaced. I froze. The room overlooked the second floor. No balcony, no ledge, nothing. The tapping came again. When I finally opened the curtain, nothing stared back at me except the reflection of my own tired eyes and the harbor lights shimmering in the dark water. I tried to tell myself it was the wind. But wind doesn't knock. The next morning, I walked to the fish market, where the air was thick with salt and the slippery musk of freshly gutted catch. I found a retired fisherman named Sato, one of the last people to speak to my uncle before he vanished. He recognized me instantly, said I looked too much like Hajime to be anyone else. When I told him why I'd come, his face tightened. "You shouldn't dig into that," he said. "The sea keeps its secrets for a reason." But when I pressed him, he exhaled sharply and told me something that sent a small hook of dread straight into my gut. "Your uncle's boat sent a signal at 3:18 a.m., he said. "We all heard it. The Coast Guard said it was just interference. But I know what I heard." He swallowed hard. "It wasn't just your uncle's voice. It was many, like they were all speaking through him." I asked him if he remembered the words. He shook his head violently. "Not words, just sounds." And then he added something even stranger. The rescue team reported the water temperature around the last known coordinates was 6 degrees warmer than surrounding areas. A detail eerily similar to a documented case from 1952, where a vanished fishing vessel's last radio signal was accompanied by an unexplained localized heat spike. That night, I found myself staring at my uncle's old handheld radio, the only thing recovered from his boat sitting on the desk in my guest house. It had been silent for 20 years, but I still brought it with me everywhere, like a relic. A final connection to a man who spent more time on the water than on land. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I took the radio down to the harbor and walked along the pier. The moon hung low over the water, a pale coin blurred by mist. I turned the radio on, static. Then something else. A faint clicking, rhythmic, like someone tapping metal against metal. I felt my skin tighten. Then a voice. Very faint. It wasn't my uncle, but it shouldn't have been anyone. "Is anyone out there?" I spun around. No one. The radio hissed. Another voice layered over the first, then another, and another. They overlapped until they were indistinguishable, like dozens of people whispering into the speaker at once, voices tangled in a way that made no sense. I dropped the radio in shock, and the moment it hit the pier, the whispers stopped, just static again. I tried to laugh it off, blaming interference from nearby boats, but when I lifted the radio, the casing felt warm, too warm, like it had been sitting under a lamp. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. The hooks were starting to multiply now. I should have left then. I should have taken the next train home. But obsession sinks its claws into you slowly, so you don't realize you're bleeding until it's too late. The next day, I went to the Kesanuma Coast Guard station and requested access to the archived distress logs from 2003. The officer on duty looked uncomfortable, but eventually agreed to let me listen to the digitized version of the call. He handed me a pair of headphones and pressed play. At first, all I heard was static and crashing waves. Then, a single voice my uncle's crackled through. "This is Hajime. Boat compromised. Something in the water." His breathing was ragged. "It's warm. God, it's warm." A heavy thud echoed, like something hitting the hull. Then things escalated fast. A sound rose in the background. Not a wave, not the engine, something else. A low hum, layered with bubbling, like boiling water and whispering at the same time. My uncle shouted something I couldn't understand. Then the hum grew louder, and suddenly multiple voices erupted through the speaker, overlapping, echoing in an impossible chorus, like a crowd trapped underwater, all trying to speak at once. I ripped the headphones off, heart slamming in my chest. The officer stared at me. "Now you understand why we don't play that recording for families." "Why did you let me hear it?" I asked. He hesitated. "One," then said, "Because you look like a man who already heard the ocean calling." His words weighed on me the rest of the day. That evening, I rented a small boat from an old man who didn't ask questions, probably because he didn't want to know the answers. At sunset, I motored out past the breakwater, following my uncle's last coordinates. The water was calm, too calm, almost oily. The sky darkened quickly, clouds swallowing the stars. I cut the engine and drifted, letting the boat rock gently beneath me. Then, I turned on the radio. Static, a faint pop. Then, "Don't listen," my uncle's voice, clear, sharp. Exactly as I remembered it. The same warning he gave before he died. My breath caught. "Uncle?" I whispered. The radio crackled brutally. The voice changed, deepened, warped. "You came back." My stomach dropped. The temperature around me shifted. The air grew warmer, thick, moist, like standing inside someone's breath. The water around the boat rippled outward in a perfect circle, as if something beneath me had exhaled. The radio hissed, voices overlapped, a chorus, a plea, a scream. The same melted-together distress I'd heard in the Coast Guard office, only louder, closer, clearer. "Help us. Don't leave us here. It's so warm." My hands shook. Then the boat lurched violently, nearly throwing me overboard. Something scraped beneath it, slow, deliberate, like claws dragging across metal. I stumbled and grabbed the railing. The water began to churn, violently, unnaturally, though the air above remained dead still. The radio exploded with noise shouts, wet gurgling, something banging, and underneath it all, the same bubbling hum that made my skin crawl. I looked down and saw light. A reddish glow rising from the depths, illuminating the swirling water like a storm brewing within the sea itself. Silhouettes moved inside the glow, human shapes, faces distorted by water, staring upward, mouths open as if calling, reaching. Arms stretched, fingers splayed, pale skin drifting like jelly. My uncle's face among them. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. He stared up at me, eyes wide, pleading, frozen in a moment between life and something else. "No," I whispered. The glow surged, and the boat pressed downward, as if the ocean itself was trying to swallow it whole. The voices crescendoed into a horrific, layered wail. I grabbed the flare gun, fired it into the air. The bright red burst tore through the darkness, and for a moment, just a moment, the glow below dimmed. The scraping stopped, the voices faltered, then everything fell silent. Completely. The water calmed. The glow faded into black. My uncle's face vanished with it. I stared at the ocean for a long time, waiting for something, anything, to surface. Nothing did. When I returned to Kesennuma hours later, the harbor was empty, the air still. I walked to my guest house in a daze, my clothes reeking of salt and something metallic. As I unlocked my door, I heard it, my radio, still in my bag, crackling to life. A single voice whispered through the static, not my uncle's, mine. "It's not finished." I dropped the radio, heart pounding. The whisper came again, louder now, and it knows you heard it. If you want more real horror stories and unexplained cases told just like this, subscribe to Fear Files Whispered. And remember, some mysteries don't stay in the past. Sleep well.